Sherres. Good evening. For some of you, it might even be a good morning or a good afternoon. I'm Rabbi Sherre Hirsch, Advisory Board Member of the Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA. And on behalf of the Friends and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's Open Mind. And Jenny, I'm so happy you're here. First, a few housekeeping items. Please give yourself the next hour and 15 minutes to really be present. We're moving so fast and we're talking about mental wellness. Give yourself the gift of this mental wellness today. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end, so feel free to put your questions in the Q&A located at the bottom of the Zoom screen at any time. I will try to get to as many of them as I can, but as you can imagine, we have so many listeners and so many questions, but you can always go to our website at www.friendsofthesemel.org, where this program today will be recorded, and you'll find a whole library of videos from past Open Mind programs. Plus, you can find a calendar, more information about our Friends Scholar Program, and our special Open Mind Film Festival for high schoolers on April 28th. So lots to look forward to, lots to know about. Feel free to go to the website, which Jason has put generously in the chat. Also, if it's your very first time today to the Open Mind series, please, we want to get to know you. So Open Mind is our free lecture and film series bringing together thought leaders and in science and culture for meaningful and relevant discussions about mental health issues. We hope, because we're able to give this service for free, is we rely on generous donations. And if you're so moved, we hope that you will help support our generous work again at our website. With that, I'm going to ask Jason to share a little audio of what's in store for you this evening.
My son Bradley was a kind and caring soul, a talented actor, and a deep thinker. But he suffered from anxiety, an eating disorder, and depression. He tried not to allow these challenges to beat him and fought through by working hard in therapy, in his community college class, and training to volunteer at a homeless shelter. On December 13th, 2017, I lost Bradley to psychiatric drug interactions. He was 21. The devastation I felt when Bradley died helped me realize that mental health care does not get the attention it deserves. We often hear about the tragedies of mental illness. Instead, I want to focus on success stories. So I began having open conversations with young adults who are getting through despite their mental health struggles.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. As you just heard, Andrea Sonnenberg is our guest this evening, along with the host of a few others. Yes, we should be clapping because she's extraordinary. First, a mother, also an attorney and nonprofit leader. When tragedy struck, many people who've lost a child would get into bed and never get up again. But you took that experience, that tremendous tragedy, and you've used it to inspire, raise awareness, and truly bring mental illness into the forefront. Along with your husband, I know you've created the Bradley Sonnenberg Wellness Initiative at USC, which I'm so proud of. It's at USC Hillel, that really provides needed support for all students, regardless of race or religion. And this podcast that we're going to shine a light on today, Getting Through, I remember talking to you about it at the very beginning, and now it's in its second season, and I love it. I could listen to it all day. So please get to any place that podcasts are, Spotify, you name it, Getting Through, and you'll hear from some of the incredible guests on the podcast today. I want to highlight that we are going to hear from Maylee Chapin, Kevin Nahai, Mike Frazier, and Jenny Pineda. And I want to especially thank the four of you, not only for your courage today, in coming on, but just the honesty and rigor with which you've been candid about your own struggles. And I know that your honesty and your courage will continue to reap rewards for years to come. And I say, if one person hears your message, we've done a really amazing work. And finally, but not least at all, is Dr. Anna Lau, who is the UCLA Department of Psychology and Associate Dean for Inclusive Excellence. Dr. Lau, your work is incredible, especially your focus on in the field of cultural issues and mental health and therapy, especially in the area of mental health for immigrant families. I know you have tremendous research. If I named all your extensive publications, we'd be here till tomorrow. But I really want to highlight how you focus on culture and parent-child relationships and how they impact mental health needs. And I hope that you'll spend some time today sharing on what you've learned from these particular young people and what that means for other immigrant families. So I want to dive right in and start with you, Andrea. You know, you took this horrible tragedy, a mother's worst nightmare, and turned it into a life mission. Tell me how you got here.
Well, it's not easy. I will tell you that. You go through all the stages of grief. And as I was going through those stages, I kind of came to realize that his death was a transformation. And it was the end of my life as I knew it and the beginning of something else and something transformative. And I realized that I wanted to make meaning out of this loss and heal the world through my son Bradley's legacy. And I felt like his work wasn't finished while he was on this earth. And in a way, he struggled to find what his purpose was. And I feel like now we are completing his purpose together. And we are doing the world together.
Did you imagine you would be the host of a podcast and shine a light on students who are struggling and young people? I mean, when he passed, did you imagine that your career as an attorney, as a mother, would lead you here?
Never. No, never. And you have to understand that when something as traumatic and tragic as that happens, you got to figure out a way to get out of bed. And that was, the very initial stages were very traumatic and very stressful and very like, how do I go on living? And then you get to a point where you say, I gotta do something to make meaning out of this. And when that realization hit, it was transformative, like I said, and able to.
Now you're in your second season of the podcast, Getting Through, and you've interviewed a number of different people, some of who we'll hear from in a moment. Tell me, what have you learned about yourself and about mental illness?
Well, the irony I came to realize was that I'm interviewing all these incredible young people about how they're getting through. And I realized that doing this project is how I'm getting through. So, I realized that this is a healing mechanism and a survival technique for me. So, it's been an incredible give and take where, I feel like I'm giving a platform to these people, but being able to give them this platform and to talk to them and learn and hear about their experiences, that is how I've learned. That's how I'm able to get through. So that's really sort of the biggest thing that I've learned from this. But then I also learn from all of my guests, and it's so inspiring to see the challenges that they go through and how they're able to persevere and how they're able to continue. I ask the same question to every one of my guests, and I say, what gives you hope? Because without hope, we've got nothing, right? And so, I always say to people, if your loved one is still alive, there's hope. So do not give up hope. And so I always want to ask my guests, what gives you hope when you're in that dark place, when you're in that place where you feel like you can't get out? What gives you hope to keep going? And I hope that by hearing that
by listeners hearing, what gives all these different people hope, it will like inspire them to dig deep inside of themselves to find that hope that we need to go on.
That is a perfect segue. And I'm going to start with Jenny. And I'm so glad you're here, Jenny. Truly, I understand after 6 suicidal attempts and 5 hospitalization, the odds were stacked against you. And we couldn't be more grateful and blessed that you're here.
Thank you.
You grew up in a Latina culture, and yes, there was a lot of stigma around mental health that we'll hear not only is in your culture, but in other cultures. And you were self-harming. I'm not giving away anything you didn't say in the podcast, but you were self-harming and you were lying about it. And yet there was a moment that you had the strength to stop and ask for help. And I want to know, how did you summon that strength?
I think it stemmed off of a lot of things, especially because you haven't mentioned this, but I'm actually a person who happens to be blind. And losing my vision was one of the hardest things I ever had to go through. But I think what gave me the real strength to really speak up for myself was that I realized that hiding all these emotions and hiding all these tragedies that I've dealt with, this loss of vision and myself, I was able to realize that hiding everything from my family, my loved ones, was only really hurting myself. And at the end of the day, I strive to help people overall. And just knowing that I can help one little person off my story was what really gave me strength at the end of the day, to be like, I really want to get better so that I can help other people get better.
Well, I also want to say I distinctly, intentionally did not mention your blindness, because one of the things you say in the podcast that I was very moved by is that people tend to pigeonhole you as blind and they don't see the totality of you. And I wanted to share that you are this vibrant, young, strong human who continues to overcome challenges, and blindness is just one facet of you. And I think just hearing your words today really indicates that if there's one young woman out there, that she finds the help and asks for it like you do. Let's pivot to Mike, because you also came from a culture that was highly stigmatized around mental health. I would even go as far to say you grew up in LA, in La Cienega, and you were in a culture that we hear often, which is be tough, especially this week. Don't be weak, be a man, strong. I mean, I can't think of a more fitting week where this has been in the news, Will Smith, yeah, right? Where that is the stereotype that you've got to stand up for yourself.
Yeah.
And yet that's not how you felt. So
yeah,
you were straddling 2 worlds, a white world, a black world, a Brentwood environment, La Cienega environment. What do you say to the person who's struggling with stigma, identity, anger, mania? What do you say to that person?
I would say, man, that's such a hard question to answer. I mean, I'll speak on what I did, I guess. And that's just, I guess I always tried to be myself. It sounds cliche, but and that's not an easy answer. It's not like, that's not the easiest thing to do, but I guess, I just know that like just me being myself, you can't really take that away from me. I'm living my truth. So whatever you say, think, feel, or do about me, towards me, that's on you. I'm doing me. I
understand you still struggle today, as do many of the panelists.
Yeah.
Tell me what that's like.
It's just it's very up and down, comes and goes. Like I just started a new job, and I was 1 month very like proud of myself and confident for, getting this job. It's like my dream job. And then as I started the job, I'm like dealing with severe anxiety and imposter syndrome, within the span of like a month. So it's just, it's very up and down. And now I'm slowly starting.
I also want to normalize that for you, because I know Dr. Lau, myself, Andrea, we all have imposter syndrome. It doesn't end. And part
Yeah.
of it is you learn to live with the discomfort.
Yeah, totally. No, exactly. But I just try to do what I think is best for me. And I just, at this point, I kind of know it's going to come and go. Sometimes I can tell when it's coming, sometimes I can't, it just happens. But I think just having awareness has really been helpful for me. Just being fully aware of myself and what my triggers are, and, what, I guess just where I need to be at a certain time or where I don't need to be. And just kind of, I guess just doing my best to be well is like probably the best answer I can give.
Well, and I love, you said in the podcast, I'm doing the best with what I've been given.
Yeah.
And I think that's the opposite of self-pity. That's a very empowered statement.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful to hear that. And I hope that you continue to get the care you need.
Thank you.
Kevin, life coach, Jewish, Persian, also a community in which there's a lot of stigma. We're seeing a trend here, right? There's a lot of stigma around mental health. And one of the things that you shared in your podcast, which I hope everyone will listen to each one of them on Getting Through with Andrea Sonnenberg, but there's not one cure. There's sort of a constellation of things that you do. It's kind of like a puzzle and you have different pieces. Tell me how you discovered this theory and what your puzzle looked like.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the panel today. It's a pleasure to speak with you and hear from all of you. I was actually on another podcast today, and I was just talking about this very concept with somebody, with the podcast host, that it takes an ecosystem. I'm a believer in psychiatric medication when it's necessary, but that is not a magic pill. You also need to combine that with therapy and coaching. You need to combine therapy and coaching with daily exercise. You need to combine daily exercise with certain foods, that may aid, and certain daily habits. So, this is difficult to say, because when we're trying to lift ourselves out of a depression or a very dark place, it's a tall order to take on 5, 6, or 7 different things. But that doesn't mean they're all not necessary. They are all necessary. You may just need to attack them one at a time. And I can't stress enough the importance of it being a puzzle, as you said, and figuring out how the pieces are going to fit together for you. And remembering that there are at least 5 or 6 or 7 different pieces of the puzzle that will create a cohesive picture of mental health.
There's also a real economics component to this. And I want to just turn to you for a second, Dr. Lau, before I go to Maylee. There's an economic component. Putting all this together, not everybody has equal access. How do we in the medical field respond to that?
It's a great question. So we have disparate access to mental health care. And we also live in a society where there isn't a prevention focus, right? And so kind of the things we need for, to give all young people the best chance at having, mental health and wellness, that's not equally distributed in our society. And we really don't have across the board good conditions to promote wellness from the get-go. And that starts with just structural determinants of health, social determinants of health, the same determinants that make good physical health, make good mental health. And we know we just have a lot of societal inequity in that. Then when it comes to a young person who's developed significant mental health challenges, that there are just a lot of barriers to accessing care. We do have some social safety nets. We are realizing as a society that we need to do more prevention in schools, for example, because all kids go to school. So, actually right now, schools are the de facto mental health system for young people. And we're asking a lot of our educational system. I know that Jenny first access care in schools. That's a really important point of contact. But we need to do a whole lot more. And certainly to access, psychiatric care and specialty mental health care, really big barriers. We have a huge shortage of folks trained as child psychiatrists in this country. And they primarily work in the private sector and not in the public sector.
I was going to say that all of you are nodding your heads. And I know, Mike, you had very limited access to mental health care. It was not even a possibility. And Jenny, you sought it through your school. Let me turn to you, Maylee. Where did you find support? And then we'll tell your story.
Sure. My answer is fairly unusual, I think, but actually, because I'm a terrorist attack survivor, I was put into touch automatically with the FBI, and they are the ones who pinpointed what was happening to me and the care I needed to get. I literally remember Googling terrorist attack therapy, and Google was like, yeah, that's not a thing. So it was the FBI who said, this is the type of specialist that you need, and this is how to get into contact with them.
And your mental health changed in a moment. Tell us about that.
Yeah, in 2019, I spent 17 hours trapped in a terrorist attack overseas. I was on a business trip there. And, obviously the certainty of your own death changes your life forever. It changes your perception, standing between good and evil in that way is really terrifying. And it alters not only sort of your perception of the world around you, but literally, your brain chemistry. So working back from that place has been a very long and difficult road for sure.
So Dr. Lau, you see young people that have mental health issues from childhood, like Mike, and you have young people like Maylee who have a sudden onset because of trauma. What does the science tell us about that?
Well, it's a big literature, and certainly it looks as though the onset of mental illness, the mean age of onset is getting lower. We're really concerned in this post-pandemic situation about all the kind of this contextual factors that are increasing rates of identified mental health conditions in young people. But one thing, to your point, that the earlier in the lifespan that individuals develop psychiatric conditions really throws off the course of child development, right? So if the earlier it happens in development, before you really developed all the resilience factors and coping factors that you might have later in development, you're sort of derailing some of those milestones that would maybe help you be able to cope if such a thing were to happen later in the lifespan.
So Mike, you shared that on the podcast that you're a bit of a misfit, that you were a sensitive kid in a rough neighborhood. Tell us when you knew that you were, quote, different, and how did it come about?
Oh man. I'd say 7th grade was when I've always known, it's always been there, but like 7th grade was when it really hit me. When I just was getting bullied. I don't even say bullied, but just like harassed, picked on, but like, yeah, I just knew then that I was just a lot more sensitive than most of the kids around me. And then that's when my like depression first hit. That's when I first actually felt depressed and was like, oh, wow, I'm depressed. This is what this feels like. Did
you feel you had anyone you could turn to for comfort?
No, I mean, I had school counselors, they knew, but I mean, the school, I don't know if it's gotten better, but at the time, like school, mental health care was very inadequate, especially in LAUSD, dealing with like a lot of just different kids from different backgrounds and different races. And just like, it's kind of chaotic. So it wasn't the best. They put me in school therapy, but it didn't really do much. My mom didn't really understand what's going on because of her background. It's not like she didn't care, but she just didn't understand.
She's an Olympian, right? Talk about being tough. She's a 2-time Olympian. So she was like, get tough, work your way through it.
Kind of, but it's more that it was more my dad that was like that, but it's more that she just didn't understand. I mean, because she came from Baltimore, which is even tougher than where I grew up, like, and you're also dealing with like generational trauma too with me as well. So like, my family's from Baltimore. They've been there since way back, since we were brought here. And so like that my family's been in the Chesapeake Bay region for that long. So, I mean, I think you're just dealing with generation of trauma for, several hundred years, I would probably say. So it's at that point, it's just so ingrained and so embedded. And like, we just grow up in tough environments, in tough areas. And so you just naturally become tough yourself. But there is a case like me where it's like, well, what if you are the sensitive, artistically inclined kid, and but that's just the world that you're around. I don't know, you have to, I guess, learn how to deal with it, but at some point it's gonna like just come out. But I mean, for as long as I can remember, now that I look back and I have hindsight from when I was like a baby, I was like a small kid, I was very sensitive and very anxious and very worried all the time and very sad all the time. So
before I turn to you, Dr. Lau, and ask you about generational trauma, I just want to ask Mike, what would you say to the parent listening now who doesn't really understand their kid? What would you say to your parents, but for somebody else?
I would say if they exhibit any signs of anxiety or worry, I would really listen to that and hone in on that. I think that's usually the first sign from what I can tell. Like, if you have a child that cries a lot, or says, I'm not getting along with the other kids, or so-and-so picked on me, or they're constantly worried when you're gone, or they don't want you to leave and they're very clingy. Like, I would look at that right away and be like, okay, there's, this is a very anxious child, because that's exactly what I was. And that's what I noticed in other, I don't know, like I have a couple of nieces and nephews, and I noticed that trait in some of them as well too.
So is there, Dr. Lau, a generational aspect to this? Is trauma carried from generation to generation? Mental illness especially?
Absolutely. Well, we know that, there are both, genetic, you can have a genetic predisposition if depression and anxiety are certainly heritable and run in families. And then to Mike's point, absolutely, there are some really important intergenerational aspects that relate to how we recognize and respond to emotional and behavioral concerns in kids. I think that with, parents who've been, raised in other backgrounds and who really come from, generations who've suffered through a lot of adversity and hardship, they're often coming to this country or with really a survival mentality. We just need to survive and to, survive financially and to provide education for youth. They're really thinking about basic needs and basic health. So when it comes to kind of, knowing how to respond to, emotional concerns, their frame of reference is very different, right? They're coming from a place where there was a lot of suffering. And so it's sort of hard for them often to understand how to prioritize all these really basic needs. And they all really want the best for their children, but there's really often a real lack of mental health literacy. And I think Mike's point is so great in terms of what to look for. It is also confusing and hard for parents because some things are temporary and some things are sort of transitional, and shy children grow up to be not shy, for example. So that question of when to worry is an important one. And I think Mike's answer is a terrific one, and actually one that I would also give to parents. It's when to worry is when that level of anxiety or those sad feelings are getting in the way of the daily activities that the child needs to be able to do to grow and thrive. So when it gets in the way of making friends, being able to comfortably go to school, do work, connect with loved ones, that's when to worry. So I really appreciate Mike's advice.
Yeah, it's good advice, Mike.
Yeah.
Kevin, was that your experience with your parents and their focus? How was it for you?
Was it my experience that they were looking out for my mental health?
know that they were just trying to give you an education and survive and give you a life, so that mental health was something different?
Yeah, well, I am very fortunate that they put a huge emphasis on my education. But the downside of that is that I went to extraordinarily difficult schools with a huge amount of pressure, which then resulted in an undue stress and anxiety for a young kid. And when that is not addressed at a young age, then it sort of festers like in a petri dish. And by the time you're 17, 18, 19, 20, you know, coupled with the traumas that I experienced around those ages, you've got a real recipe for disaster. And I think in addition to the intergenerational aspect, there is also a hierarchy of siblings aspect that often contributes to mental health challenges. So, for example, I'm the youngest of three. As a kid, I was very happy-go-lucky. And therefore, I didn't get any attention to my mental health because my older siblings were higher in their levels of neuroticism and negative emotion. And I mean neuroticism in the clinical sense, not, being like a crazy neurotic person. They had more anxiety, they had more obsessive compulsive tendencies. I didn't have any of that. Therefore, everybody thought, oh, Kevin is just like this cute, optimistic, funny kid, which I am. But then but that can have the opposite effect, and then in other families, if you have two or three really high achieving older siblings, maybe the middle one gets ignored, or the youngest one is comparing him or herself to the other ones. If you've got like a workaholic father, one of the kids thinks that he needs to aspire to that standard. So the family dynamics, have a lot to do with what shapes our mental health.
So Dr. Lau, I have to have you comment on it, then Andrea, but what you just said, Kevin, it's like, we don't live on an island, right? We don't live in a vacuum, and this input of the family. And I also, as a parent, I'm sitting here thinking, we send her to the private school, we don't send her to the private school, we send them to the LAUSD, like they're the youngest in the family, the oldest of the parents. What do we do? But first, talk to us, Dr. Lau, about how the family dynamic plays a role in mental health.
Certainly a very, very important context for both, protective factors and also risk factors. So, stress that happens in the family, children don't leave that at the door, right? They carry that with them in whatever shape it takes. Families are also really, really essential in, essential parts of the treatment and wrapping that child in supportive care when a mental health challenge does arise. So we often, for some interventions and for some ages of children, we actually need the parent to be, often a focal point of the intervention, because they're the ones that are with the child, throughout the day, and can help change the environmental factors that are, contributing to an emotional or behavioral challenge. So yeah, really, really, really important context to pay attention to. And it is hard for parents too. I can definitely relate to that. And there are a lot of complexity. You can't parent Kevin the same way you parent Mike and expect to have the same outcome. So there are a lot of challenges, and parents need a lot of support through that too.
Right. And you can't even parent your own children the same way, which
right.
is tricky.
Yeah.
Andrea, I want to go to that for a second. As a parent who lost a child to mental illness and who was very out in front and working with Bradley, what were sort of the stages of grief that you alluded to? And what do you say to parents who are struggling?
You go through the anger phase, why me? how did this happen? You got to blame somebody. You go through the questioning stage, you go through the sadness, of course, and finally you come to acceptance. But what I tell grieving parents a lot is that two things that I like to point out is, one is to really do things that keep you connected to that child. So joyful things, so that you have a way to relate to that child joyfully. You make their favorite recipe, you play their favorite music.
Play Pokemon Go.
Exactly. Like something that's joyful, that puts a smile on your face. Like my Bradley was an incredible singer and performer. And I sang when I was a youngster, and I started singing again because the cantor at my synagogue said, come in and sing. Let's have you sing again, because it's a way to stay connected to your son in a joyful way. And it brings tears to my eyes, but it warms my heart because it's a way that I am remembering him and honoring him in a loving, happy way. And then I also recommend to people that they create some kind of a legacy. And it doesn't have to be a podcast, and it doesn't have to be a foundation. It's just something. Maybe it's the family goes to the beach and, throws rocks into the beach because the lost child loved the beach, or you create a beach walk because the loved one was an environmentalist and, loved taking care of the world in that regard. So I really recommend those sorts of things. And then the third thing, and actually really what saved me, was my grief group. And I think it really goes to finding a community. And I think that works in any aspect of life. And I think that's, in essence, a part of what drove me to do this podcast, because I wanted to create a community. I wanted to create a community of people who are suffering with mental health challenges and or supporting people that are suffering with mental health challenges. And we all are touched by it, either ourselves or a loved one or a friend. And so by creating a community, we feel supported, we feel understood, we feel heard. And so finding a grief group for me with other women who had lost a child, they understood what I was going through. And when I would say, oh, it's so hard to hear this, and they would say, oh, I know. And so, those are really kind of the things that help me get through. And that's why I feel like it's so important to have community in whatever aspect.
What I love about what you're saying is like, you just built a community right here now, just by bringing us all together. I mean, we will be forever connected. Jenny, I want to turn to you for a second. How has your community supported you or not?
Well, like you mentioned before, I do live in a Latino household. And the stigma and the taboo around that is pretty much, around mental health specifically, is pretty much inevitable in my household. I think my community specifically, with my family, and also being in the blind and visually impaired community, has just kind of, specifically regarding my family, they were always really putting me up on the platter to be a really strong person. And that made me think I had to be the strong person. So in a way, it wasn't really helping me, but they thought they were. And so that's what I felt like I had to live up to. But then what really helped me was that when I expressed my concerns about, struggling mentally and being in the really dark abyss of depression, was that even though they didn't understand where I was coming from, they don't understand mental health, they don't understand why I would want to go to a stranger and talk about, my struggles in a therapy session, they were just willing to listen. And that's really all I needed at the end of the day.
I love that advice. Is sometimes, even if you don't understand, you just need to listen. And Maylee, you're nodding your head. Did you have a similar experience?
Yeah, I think that it all relates back to earlier you were talking to Mike about advice for parents. And I think something Andrea and I talk about all the time is just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not real, right? This is constantly what we're trying to get out into the world about mental health struggles. And I think that was difficult for some of my family. You know, they think of me as a high achiever. They think of me as someone who can always overcome. And I think of myself that way. So similar to Jenny, in a way that retarded my ability to heal, because I thought, well, I should just be able to put this behind me. And I couldn't, right? I needed help. And sometimes you have to swallow your pride and say, okay, in this moment, I'm not a strong person, just as all of us have weak moments, right? We all have struggles and times where we need to reach out for help. So I think as my family watched how much therapy helped me, they finally understood how important that part of my healing was.
So Dr. Lau, what advice do you give to parents who they're trying their best to help, and that may be the wrong advice with the best intentions, or it's just too much for their kids? What do you tell parents?
I do think, parents want the best for their kids. And I think it is frustrating and baffling sometimes for parents to know how to be that support. And often it comes as advice giving, or you just need to do X, Y, and Z, because they really do want to be able to fix the problem. I think, just helping parents understand that they don't have to, it's not on them themselves and their shoulders to fix that problem. And kind of helping sort of pave the way to sort of get expert help. You don't want to do your own plumbing or your own car mechanic work or pull your own teeth, and sort of understanding where you can lean on folks who are really positioned to help your kid. And I sort of just want to echo at what everyone's saying. It's this wish to be self-reliant. And when your child is having an emotional or behavioral challenge, I think parents do feel like they should be equipped to help their children. And just like Mealy and Jenny and others are saying, young people also want to feel self-reliant. But I think we just really need to invert that and say it takes a lot of strength to recognize when you need help and when you're willing to learn the tools. And like Kevin said, it's actually really hard work. It's not an easy way out. Giving yourself those tools to equip yourself to manage your mental health is a lot of hard work. And it is also ultimately becoming self-reliant.
Well, it's also, I love what you said, sometimes the people closest to us so desperately don't want to see us suffer that they're the worst at fixing us. And that's why it's even more important to have people in your larger arena that you can turn to. I want to go back to you, Andrea. What is your hope for the mental health world in the next 5-10 years?
Well, I really want to see improved access. I really want, like, everybody that needs to get mental health care can get it. I want people to seek the care that they need. Statistically, we see that 60% of the people that need mental health care don't seek the care. You hurt your leg, you go to the doctor. You break your leg, you go, you get your cast. 60% of us are not seeking mental health care when we need it. I also want to see, in that same vein, parity between mental and physical health. So just like you break your leg and you go to the doctor, you have a mental health issue, you go, you get treatment. So that's really what I'm hopeful for. And back to the sort of access point, I'm hopeful that as we start developing technology, therapists online, Mealy has an app now that deals with PTSD online, that you can actually seek a cure, online for a totally affordable fee. and making resources available at colleges, like the wellness initiative that we have at USC. So we make this stuff more available. And then I really want, and this is why I do the podcast and why I talk on panels, is I want us to be open and not no shame and no stigma about mental health. Again, it's the same as physical health, and we can talk about it, and we can share resources, and we can share, what are you doing with your child that's struggling with these issues? Oh, what doctor do you go to? Oh, that sounds great. Who should I see? The Semel Institute has great, the Friends of the Semel Institute has great webinars about mental health. Oh, great. I'm going to sign up. The more we talk about this kind of stuff, the more we make it available to people, the more that we can increase wellness in the community.
So I think these young people right here are doing just that. Maylee, you've created an app. Can you tell us about it and why?
Yeah, absolutely. My therapy, the short answer is that my therapy cost close to $8,000 out of pocket that I paid. And that was life-saving treatment for me. I didn't want to be alive anymore, and I wouldn't be here without it. And as Andrea said, the majority of people who need those resources will never get them today. And that's what keeps me up at night. I think that's unacceptable. And so I wanted to give people something accessible, scalable, that gave them the same type of evidence-based protocols that I learned in therapy that they could implement in a lower touch manner with a therapist or on their own. And so the app is called Trauma Brace. It's available on iPhone. And we've been really fortunate to see great success with it. And I think the people who complete the app are amazing to work through that on their own. As has been mentioned, it's some of the hardest work you'll ever do. But it's so worth it because, it saves lives. So
thank you for doing that. Yeah. Jenny, there's a young girl out there who is struggling right now. What does she do first?
Well, for me, I would say to kind of come to terms with it yourself, because like I've, been constantly saying, I was really neglected to the fact that I was even struggling in the first place. So really sitting with my feelings and sitting in that dark place was really important for me to be able to take the first step to even ask for help, or even just say to myself, like, I am not okay, or just saying like, I feel like I don't want to live today, was obviously, a really dark thing for me to say, and it's really negative. However, that was the first step that I took in order for me to be able to reach out for help and say, okay, if I'm going to admit this to myself, like, it's real, this is real. I need to, the same way, like Andrea was saying, I need to, if I have a broken leg, I'm going to go and I'm going to seek for help. And admitting that to yourself is one of the most crucial things when it comes to seeking treatment. And so I would just say, be real with yourself and really have some self-compassion.
Beautiful. And Dr. Lau, sometimes you don't even know that you're in the depths of despair, and you want to be honest with yourself, like Jenny says, but what are those signs that you are in the depths, both for the people suffering, but also for the parents and grandparents listening?
I would say one of the big signs for depression, we all get stressed, we all feel sad sometimes, but a really big sign is when you don't enjoy things you would otherwise have enjoyed. You should have lost a sense of pleasure, and that's a real sign. So the loss of positive feelings is a really big sign, because kind of stress can kind of come and go, worry can come and go, but when you see that this is, I used to enjoy XYZ, I used to want to be with my friends, I used to want to play baseball, when that's gone, that's a real worry.
Right. So when you stop enjoying that which is always brought you joy, and Mike, you were nodding your head, is that something you saw as a warning sign in your own life? What did you enjoy that you stopped enjoying?
Yeah, absolutely. So wait, by the way, sorry I'm so fidgety. I'm really tall, my knee hurts. I'm like sitting, I've been sitting at my desk all day.
We want you to be comfortable. So if you need to
I
stand
get
up,
a good
stand up.
little like, get a good little stretch in.
Just
There we
need
go.
the camera to turn so that we can see your cute face.
Okay, now I'm back. Seemed to like stretch my leg out. Yeah, no, that was like one of the first that's like one of the major things that happens with me when I go through a depressive episode is I stop doing things that I enjoy doing, even things that I know that are beneficial to me that will bring me out of it. I can't even bring myself to do them. You know, I'm a musician, and if I like they, you know, it's the stereotype of like, oh, you need to be depressed to make music. I mean, that's true maybe for some people, but I know for most people, if you're depressed, it's impossible to make music and to be creative. And that's like the first thing that goes for me is like, I can't even open my laptop and start working on stuff that I need to work on actually. So yeah, that.
Yeah, I hear that. Kevin, there's a lot of questions coming in, and I want to encourage our audience to put in questions for Dr. Lau, for Andrea, and for all our panelists. Feel free to put them at the Q&A, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, or you can put them in the chat. But Kevin, you're now 29, is that correct?
Yes.
And you are a life coach, which took some time to find your calling, but it sounds like it is your calling now.
Thank you.
One of our guests asked, what if your adult children don't want your help? What do they come to you? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're directing this question to me. This is something I spoke about on the podcast with Andrea. So I was extremely treatment resistant. You know, I had major depression, very severe anorexia, and the onset of an incurable disease. And I was in denial about all three of them, and I was refusing treatment for all three of them. So I was getting sicker and sicker by the minute. And then even when I did begrudgingly start to accept treatment, I didn't really lean into it, and I would half-ass it, excuse my language. And so now in my coaching, one of the things that I actually specialize in is working with treatment resistant people in their 20s and 30s. So, you know, if there are any parents out there who are struggling with this, you can feel free to get my info and contact me. But, you know, basically there were a lot of things that my parents and psychotherapists and other people who really genuinely wanted to help me, there were things that they were doing that were producing the opposite effect. And it's not, you know, for lack of intelligence or whatever, or care. It's just, you have to, you know, unless you have been there, unless you have been in the position of somebody who really hates themselves and wants to self-isolate and wants to shut themselves away from everybody, and you have all of these people trying to offer you help and tell you what you should do all the time, you don't know what sort of effect, you know, a backfire effect that can happen. Now, as I said, I'm extremely fortunate because there are other people, sounds like, you know, Mike was in a camp where nobody was reaching out and saying, hey, let me help you, but he was on his own. So I'm not trying to paint a woe is me story, but, you know, for children or young adults who do have access to mental health and their parents do want to help them, but they're treatment resistant, those parents and their, you know, their therapists and their coaches and their aunts and uncles do have to sort of be educated on taking a different approach to produce the desired result.
It's so important. People have already asked for your number. Dr. Lau, it's so confusing to the parent listening right now. There feels like there's so many different paths, and as a parent struggling, you don't know what to do. As a parent, do they come to UCLA? Where do we go? I mean, I know listening to Open Mind has so many incredible opportunities to find a doorway, but then what?
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to find a provider who's taking clients, right? And so you do have to knock on a lot of doors, and that's
Especially in
challenging.
COVID, right?
Yes,
I see
especially
that
in COVID.
therapists and mental health professionals are busier than they've ever been.
That is
So
true. Our resources are really taxed right now. If you have a child and they are in school, I would 100% recommend that you reach out to the school psychologist there. If they are attending a college or university, I would look into what access they have to student counseling services there. So I would lean into those resources. And then there is the UCLA Semel Institute, the access number. Maybe we can drop that into the chat, as well as kind of looking into your own, if you're fortunate to have insurance, your insurance should have a panel of behavioral health services that would be a network. So I would definitely look into your own insurance carriers' resources as well.
there's some really good tips. So I want to do a sort of closing, and I want to give each of you a moment to think about the question. And I'm going to ask it in different ways. So I'm going to start with you, Maylee. Today, what gives you hope? And I'm taking a lead from Andrea.
I think that like me personally on a daily basis, what gives me hope is that I know from personal experience that healing is possible, and that coming through a traumatic experience on the other side is so worth the hard work that it takes to get there. And so that's what I really try to share with people. There's nothing worse than living with symptoms of mental illness and not knowing where to turn or what to lean on. So anything is better than that. And healing especially is so much better. And I really believe there's some amount of healing out there for everyone. So that's what really gives me hope.
I love that. And I think everybody should put that on their door. Healing is possible, because I so deeply believe that. Mike, what gives you hope?
Just like the will to be better and to just like achieve the peace that I want in my life, that I see that I can achieve. That just always keeps me going, and just just knowing that I want peace in my life. I just want total peace, and I'll do whatever I need to do to achieve that. So
right, and that every human being deserves, just from their being, peace of mind, peace of soul, peace of body. So I love that.
Exactly.
Jenny, what gives you hope?
Well, I definitely think that it's helping others. Like for me, I said this in the podcast with Andrea, but I like to go based off a saying that I kind of thought of: two negatives make a positive. And for me, that has really kept me going, because I've gone through a lot of struggles in my life, from losing my vision to losing loved ones to losing myself to struggling mentally and emotionally and physically and so many other aspects in my life. And I'm very vocal and open to my family and obviously my friends. And I post a lot about my mental health journey, like online, and I have so many comments coming in from, like, I'm not famous or anything, but my friends who reach out to me, or my family who reaches out to me, and they thank me for sharing my story, just kind of reminds me that this is what I'm doing this for. I'm studying psychology right now, and this is my calling. I want to help people, and that's really what gives me hope at the end of the day, to just know that I'm helping a couple of people out, and just knowing that I'm gonna strive towards accomplishing my goals, and just knowing that at the end of the day, I'm helping someone, whether it be 1 or 100 people.
I so resonate with that. And I know everybody on the panel does, that service is truly meaningful and purposeful. I'm a rabbi, and there's actually a teaching that our task here is to leave the world a little better than when we came, by helping another soul. Notice it's not in the plural, souls, but another soul. And you're doing that. And I can tell you, you've already touched my soul and everybody on this panel so deeply. So thank you. Kevin, hope, does it come from religion or God?
No, I mean, I think my faith is one source that gives me hope, but above all, what gives me hope personally is progress. I believe that the only way we continue to make progress is by tracking the progress we have already made. So if I can look at my journey and see that there was a time that I couldn't get out of bed for 36 hours, and then after that, I started getting out of bed and going to class. And then after that, I got a job. And then after that, I got a girlfriend. And then after that, I worked through trauma and, so forth and so on. And to where I am today, and where I am today, God willing, in a few years, I'll be married with children and shaping other people's lives, and my career will be illustrious. And I mean, it doesn't have to be these huge things, but 1% better every single day. It's like mathematics, and that really gives me hope. It really gives me hope that if you do the tiny things every single day, it's like a math equation. Your life will get better. And in Mike's episode with Andrea, he said it gets better. It really does. So shout out to you, Mike. I listened to that, and keep making progress and keep tracking the progress that you are making.
There's real science behind that, Dr. Lau, right? To be able to see where you've come from. I love that you said that.
Absolutely.
And to give you a promise of the future. Is that what the science tells us?
It is 100% an evidence-based strategy. And Meili talked about the evidence base, and that's a really big part of it. It's so easy when you're prone to mood challenges to only see the negative, right? And so you have to be intentional about looking at the positives, for sure.
Beautiful. And Andrea, the question that you ask at the end of every podcast, what gives you hope? I'm going to flip it today. Why is that so important to you?
Because without hope, we don't have a purpose and we don't have a reason to go on. So hope is everything. And to what gives me hope is seeing these young people and seeing what they've accomplished and seeing their resilience. It gives me the hope that they can inspire others on their paths, on their healing paths as well. And
I can't echo that more. And I want to say that the Open Mind Institute gives me hope. The work that Vicki Goodman and Wendy Kelman and Jason do each day to shine a light on these mental issues. And it's incredible that we're sitting here in a worldwide conversation, really talking about something that was a conversation that stood behind closed doors. So before we close, I want to say, make sure you mark your calendars. Tuesday, April 19th at 5 p.m., Dr. Thomas Insel will be our next guest on the Open Mind series. And I can tell you that, it's on the podcast, Getting Through, right, Andrea? He was the head of the National Institute for Mental Health for 13 years, and he'll be joined by Dr. Jonathan Sheeran and Dr. Thomas Strauss. And what you won't want to miss it, because this is an ongoing conversation, and the more educated we are, the better we can be together. So final word, I want to say to each of you that as a parent and as a professional, I am truly inspired, because each of you are already making a legacy for yourselves. You're already telling the world, I am here, I matter, because I am God's gift. And Andrea, I can't thank you enough for giving us a platform, and Vicki and Wendy for giving us this series and this work that you do. And Dr. Lau, I know that the science will take us there, and that there will be a future where getting help for mental illness is just like getting your leg fixed when you break it. And I look forward to that day. And I know that is when we know that peace will be on earth. So I want to thank all of you for being here today. Please join us again at the Open Mind series. Thank you, Jenny, Maylee, Mike, Kevin, Andrea, Dr. Lau. Make sure you listen to Getting Through. We'll see you soon.